Welcome back to The Book Stop. I'm so excited to talk about today's episode. Fair warning moving forward, this podcast does contain spoilers as we go over major events within the novels. Before we get into it, don't forget to follow us on Apple, Spotify, and Instagram at The Book Stop Podcast. And welcome back to another episode of The Book Stop.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
Thank you for joining us tonight.
Not a problem.
Yeah, what book are we going to be talking about today?
Well, I believe we chose Where the Red Fern Grows.
Yeah, so this book came out in 1961, and a little bit about the author, Wilson Rawls. It was interesting because I was reading about him, and in like the 30s to 40s, he was a carpenter that traveled around like Canada, Alaska, like right in there, and was writing this book, a manuscript for it. So you really get to see how the landscape kind of affect this story and how important it is to it. And then after he wrote the book and, did all this traveling, he became a motivational speaker and visited over 2,000 schools. Very interesting.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah. So we're going to play a little game to get us going here. The first game we're going to play is you're going to describe this book in 30 seconds.
Well, long story short, it's about a boy and his dogs. He was very determined to get some dogs and, become the best damn coon hunter there ever was. It's about as best as I can give that to you, short and sweet.
Okay. All right. I mean, I guess it's kind of the moral of the story, so I'm just going to summarize it for anybody who hasn't heard the story before. So this story follows an inseparable trio, Billy and his red hounds, Dan and Ann, as they roam relentlessly through the Ozarks, trying to become the best coon hunter. Their efforts proven victorious as they win the First Place Cup annual coon hunt contest, capturing the infamous ghost coon and bravely fighting a mountain lion. Through these adventures, Billy realizes the true meaning of friendship, loyalty, and more.
Pretty much it.
So let's dive into it. So this book was pretty short. I think it was like a...
Yeah, it was like a 6-hour audio book, yeah. And then we got the opportunity of watching the movie. I don't know if y'all did or not in your elementary school, but we totally did.
Yeah, I don't remember if I did or not, but I feel like I have seen the movie, but it's been so long that I couldn't tell you. To start out, we're going to do our favorite quotes. So my quote is, "People have been trying to understand dogs ever since the beginning of time. One never knows what they'll do. You can read every day where a dog saves the life of a drowning child or lays down his life for his master. Some people call this loyalty. I don't. I may be wrong, but I call it love." So I really like this quote because it's the entire story. So the dogs, Dan and Ann, they were so attached to Billy from the very beginning.
Like they were inseparable from him. Yeah,
from the very beginning. And they did this multiple times where they literally would lay down their life. They wouldn't even have a second thought about sacrificing themselves to save Billy. And he relied on these dogs for a lot of stuff, not only getting him through his childhood and stuff, but he relied on them to learn different things and
just getting an understanding of what made them, I guess, have their own unique characteristics and personalities.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he got very detailed with how he looked at both of them. I mean, old Dan was the bronze, so to speak, and little Ann was the brains.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a neat little description that he gave both the dogs.
Yeah, they were kind of the both sides of one coin type deal. Yeah, so I really like this quote. I think it really sums up the relationship between Billy and his dogs. So what quote did you bring?
Well, mine's more simpler, more towards the beginning of the book, really. Now, this was when him and his new coon dogs were, trapping their first coon. And he said, "I made a bargain with my dogs. I told them that if they would put one in a tree, I'd do the rest. Well, they fulfilled their part of the bargain. Now it's up to me to do my part. I'm going to, Papa. I'm going to cut it down. I don't care if it takes me a year." Now, this is just where he was spending over the night out in the woods. I can't remember what tree type it was that he was trying to cut down. But his dad, his papa, came out there, was worried, well, his mom was worried about him, sent him out there just to check on him and see how he was doing. Dad was very impressed with what he said. I think ultimately the reason why I chose this was because in all honesty, I mean, determination makes a good person, in my opinion. But at the same time, it's also proven a point that, or say that you're going to do something, you need to follow through it. And not just go through it and cut out halfway and be like, okay, I'm done. This is just practically impossible. Because, I mean, it's kind of like a life lesson in the sense telling you that you need to be determined and persistent when things get hard in life. And that's just kind of how I saw it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it shows that the relationships between his dog and him, it's not one-sided. The entire time they are going through this journey together. And like he says, like, if you do this, I'll do this. It's not him just relying and making them do all the work. It's like a joint effort. They're all trying to achieve this one thing together, so. And another thing about that scene where he cuts down the tree, what I really like about Billy that shows a lot of character is that he actually apologizes to the tree. He's like, I'm sorry I cut you down. I'm sorry that it had to be this way, but, you know, I need to get this raccoon so we could sell the pelt so that way they could have money. Like, a lot of the times, Billy's very remorseful for doing these things to the coons. But yeah, he doesn't want to, like, be wasteful and hunt these coons for, like, just for fun.
Resourceful.
Yeah, like, he's doing this so that way his family could survive, because they are pretty poor, and this takes place in the 20s.
In the Great Depression.
Yeah, so they don't have a lot of money. It took Billy 2 years to save up the pennies that he made.
Well, he was selling, to the fishermen, he was selling fruits and vegetables. He was selling bait like minnows and crawfish. And he also done a little errand running for his grandpa. So all the pennies and dimes and nickels that he accumulated over 2 years ended up getting him $50. For a 12-year-old is pretty impressive.
Yeah, because the puppies were
$25 a piece.
So, and his dad was like, we just can't afford it. Like, we're trying to get out the slums right now, so we're trying to save money so we can get out. And he had a lot of sisters, like
3 sisters and one on the way.
So he had a bunch of sisters, so he couldn't really rely on his parents to do that, but it also shows, like, good determination on him. Like, he spent 2 years saving up the money, pennies by pennies, and the day that he finally was like, I have enough, he goes to his grandpa, and his grandpa is just, again, amazed that he was able to do this, and that he didn't, like, waver from his passion and his dream to be like, oh, I'm just gonna go buy a bag of candy, or I'm gonna go and give it to my parents to help out. He was like, I really want these dogs. This is all I care about. And it showed, like, how determined he was to get them.
I found it kind of funny of how when he did go up to his grandpa, and his grandpa kind of like hinted out, like, you sure do need a haircut, don't you? And he's like, well, yeah. And he's like, well, what about shoes? And he kind of pointed out, you know, certain things that he thinks that it's a necessity for him. And then at the end of the day, he's like, well, it's your money. Do what you want with it. Yeah.
It's like that saying where you have to spend money to make money. So he saved this money up to spend it on these dogs. And then in the end, he ended up winning them like $300 or something like that at the end at the contest. And that's how they ended up getting to move out of their house and get to move into the city, because he won that with the dogs. But we'll talk about that in a second. So another big theme in this story is obviously the circle of life. We have Billy being this small, innocent child. He's like 12, I think, at the beginning of the story. And he gets to see the journey that these dogs get to take in their unfortunately short life. If you don't know the story, spoiler, they both die at the end. The dogs die. He really gets to see, like, how they grow, like, from being puppies to slowly becoming their own individual person. And then in the end, dying and seeing the impact of death that it has on, like, little Anne when her brother dies. You get to see, like, her being so heartbroken that she does end up passing. You see a lot of really dark things in the story. Like, another example would be when Reuben dies.
So what had happened was there was a bet for the ghost coon, and Reuben decided he was going to go ahead and start picking a fight with him because Blue came in. And he started fighting with old Dan. At first, it was like a losing fight because old Blue was having the upper hand on Dan, and same thing with Reuben with Billy. But Billy was wanting to try to get up so hard to stop the fight between the dogs because he didn't want his dogs to be killed by Reuben's dog. And then the tables kind of turned. The youngest kid, I don't remember his name, but he was like, they're killing old Blue. They're killing old Blue. Reuben got up. He took Billy's axe, and he's like, I'm going to kill them dogs. And he tripped over a branch or something, like a stump or something, and fell right onto the axe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I brought that up because I find it interesting how Billy's parents and his grandfather react to that. Because obviously nowadays that would be a whole investigation to figure out what happened and
lawsuits,
a lot of different things. Those dogs would have been put down. Like there would have been a lot of legal stuff and invested into this. But back in the 1920s, his parents pretty much said, forget about it. Pretend like it never happened. Brush it off. Don't feel guilty about this. It's best if you just forget. Don't let this affect your future type stuff. They'd had a funeral and then that was it. No one said anything again about it.
In all honesty, it wasn't really Billy's fault to begin with.
Right, but I think it's weird to think of like the time difference of how like 100 years later it would be a whole big thing and everything, but back then it was just like, another kid gone. When the dogs died, the parents say the same exact thing. They're like, don't fret about this. Dan died because Billy was kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time with the mountain lion, and his parents were like, don't fret about it. It's best if you don't forget, or it's best if you forget. You'll understand when you're older was one line that stood out to me. They were like, you'll understand why all this happens when you get older. And it's like, half the time you really don't understand when you get older, especially with like death, for example. You don't really understand it. It's something that's completely unknown to us, and to just say it to a kid, it feels like you kind of just brush it under because you don't really know what to say.
I mean, I suppose that's pretty accurate, but at the same time, the concept of death, when you're younger, you don't really think about why things happen. As you get older, you kind of get to the point in your life where you're like, all right, well, I understand why these things happen. Like, say, for example, death. As you said, it's an unknown factor. But at the same time, we understand that death is just kind of part of life. We can't do anything about it. Can't avoid it. We can't prevent it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just one of those things where you just got to learn a lesson in it if there's a lesson to be learned in it.
Yeah. I just never liked that term, of that phrase of you'll understand when you're older, because I feel like half the time adults have absolutely no idea what's going on. Who was your favorite character?
Pretty easy. It's got to be Grandpa. Over the course of the story, you learn that really and truly, he was reliving his youth. The more that you read into the story, the more that you learn that, he missed the thrill of being a coon hunter and seeing his grandson go and become a coon hunter himself. He was like reliving his glory days, so to speak. I don't know. He understood Billy a lot more than anybody else really did, in my opinion. I don't know. He's like that grandpa that everyone really wants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he was a good choice. I think he added a lot to the story and was a kind of a good driving point for Billy, because I think he always kind of supported him. For example, when they did the bet, he was like, "Oh yeah, Dan and Ann are definitely going to win." And at the end when they do the contest, he was just always there to support Billy and his dog. So yeah, I like him. I said my favorite character was Billy because I like that we got to watch him grow up throughout the story. And I really like how determined he was and how he was kind of, when you put him on a mission, he's going to win or he's going to keep doing it until he does. Nothing was ever going to be enough for him because he always wanted to strive to be the next best thing. And I liked how caring he was towards his sisters as well. When he always got a bag of candy from his grandpa, he always gave it to his sister. He would sneak a piece or two, but he would always give the whole bag to his sisters. When he won the cup, he was like, I'm going to win that first prize in that gold cup for you, to his littlest sister. And then he ended up winning 2 cups, so he got to give both of them to his sisters. So I liked how caring he was towards them, being the oldest out of all of them. And yeah, I just really I think he was a good main character.
Passion and determination goes a long way in this, especially in this story.
Yeah. Another thing I want to talk about is kind of like the sense of greed in the story. So, for example, was the traps that Grandpa made, that if you were to do a little, a little snare, and you put a shiny thing in there, and, okay, so he would grab the thing in the snare, and his hand would be around the shiny thing, and he couldn't get himself out, because he's so greedy that he won't take it out. But if he were to drop the thing and pull his hand out, he would have been able to get away. And Billy was able to catch coons because of how greedy they were, and how that kind of ties in with like nowadays of how greed is kind of such a driving force for a lot of people, where people's success kind of is driven by greed, but at the same time can be their downfall.
I mean, greed is one of the 7 deadly sins. Unfortunately, it's one of those sins where it can't be good, nor can it be bad. Like you mentioned, greed today, I mean, it's kind of a mixture of good and bad drive. I mean, greed honestly helps you get where you can be successful in life, but at the same time, too much greed is going to ultimately be your downfall, like the raccoons had found out.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I think there's definitely a fine line where you can have a sense of greed where it pushes you, and there's probably times when Billy himself was a little greedy on some stuff. Like at the beginning of the story, when he really wanted those dogs and his dad was like, no, we just can't afford it. And then he got a little greedy with like his money, and he was like, well, I'm going to save up all my money. And even though it would help out the farm and the family, I'm going to save up for myself. And yes, he did earn it himself. But when you have a family of like 6, 7, 8 people, you got to help out around the house. You got to put that money towards it. But in the end, his greed does help when he does get those dogs and wins that first prize. So it's definitely a fine line, and you have to kind of balance on it so it's not going to overthrow everything.
I mean, when need becomes a bad thing, it becomes greed. But when need becomes a good thing, it becomes determination. And I think that's where this book altogether is kind of like a life lesson. You can be greedy, but at the same time, that greediness can turn to determination that's really going to benefit you in the future.
Mm-hmm. So the next thing I talk about is I really like the atmosphere of this story. I liked how the time period it was set in. I liked the landscaping. I liked the wildlife in it. I liked the different areas, that it wasn't just stagnant in one place. It was kind of all over the place. Like we had the riverside, we had the grandpa's store, we had the forest, we had the mountains, we have the city. Yeah, we have a lot of different areas. And I think that he described it very well too. Like a lot of his descriptions, it felt like I was actually there. So I think he did a really well job, and I think that kind of draws back to when he did that. He did the traveling around to see different perspectives of different kinds of surroundings instead of the same one. So I like that he pulled that into the story.
I think that's why they kind of considered this an autobiography.
He was raised around the same time, and maybe this is something that maybe he always wished he had these kind of dogs, and maybe this is the story he thought it would have ended up. I'm not sure. Another scene I want to talk about is Anne's river scene when they go out in the winter and she goes on the river and the ice breaks and she gets stuck. How Billy reacted to it was I felt very out of character. Because he did try to go out into the river and save her, but the ice was too thin and it kept breaking, and he thought of a plan. But after that first plan didn't work, he threw himself on the riverbed and just cried and said, she's dead, I'm never going to get her back. She's already frozen to death and down the river by then. And then, he finally hears Dan howling and he gets up and goes. Instead of I would have ran for an adult. Even if I wouldn't have made it in time, I would have been screaming my head off. Eventually his dad would have heard him, but I would have been screaming my head off, running to get an adult, not just sitting on the riverbank and crying. But in the end, he was able to save her. But I just found that one, I was like, whoa, this is really out of character for Billy. But it was kind of like a breaking point for him, where he was like, his first acceptance of like, oh, she's not going to make it out.
First concept of grasping a near-death experience.
Mm-hmm.
Because he did ended up going in there himself and ultimately pulling her out from the leash by, I think he used like a stick or something.
Yeah, he grabs it, and then the water ends up not being that deep, so he just walks out and grabs her. I'm pretty sure.
Cold as hell, but
yeah,
he ended up being sick for a few days. But I mean, hey,
better than that than have my dog be dead. Kind of like a turning point for Billy, where he's like, they're not as invincible as I think they are. This is kind of your first brink of death in the sense that it's going to affect you. Because he's probably used to being around livestock and cows, pigs, sheep, and all that end up, they do probably slaughter for meat because they had that smokehouse. So, but this is the first time where he's actually feeling attached to an animal. So he's like, oh God, What am I gonna do? So who would you say is your favorite relationship in the story?
That would have to be Anne and Dan. Throughout the entire book, you're sitting there watch these two pups grow into full-fledged dogs, and Dan would not do anything without Anne. Like, he wouldn't eat until she got something. Like, for example, when Dan sniffed his food, he sat there and waited until Anne got her food, and then they started munching. There was also the scenario with he wouldn't hunt without Anne being there.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's because of them having such a connection to one another, because they've been so close to one another from birth to death. It's like as if they were in sync with one another almost.
Mm-hmm. I would go as far as saying that they were soulmates. They were destined to be together until the very end. They were definitely connected by something stronger than just being, from the same litter. They were definitely fused to be like one unit. You did not see one without the other.
I mean, and it was even shown even deeper for the portion of when at the end of the book, when old Dan had died. Little Anne was so depressed that she would not eat, she would not drink, she wouldn't do anything. She basically, in the short scheme of things, she's like, well, he's dead. I might as well just join him. Because at this point, life isn't really worth going without, as you would say, your soulmate. So...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she got very depressed after he died, and then she followed along not much long after. So I would say my relationship, I already said it, but was Billy and his grandpa. Just classic grandpa-grandson relationship. Supported him from the very beginning until the end. Honestly, wish he was in it more. Like, I wish grandpa was in it a little bit more. I just loved every scene when he was at the little shop, and he was always like, whenever all the coon hunters came in, he's like, well, my grandson's the best. So that's all I gotta say. So I think they had the best relationship. My favorite, at least.
I think it was because grandpa saw a lot of his younger years in Billy.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said earlier, I mean, he felt like he was practically reliving his youth with how Billy became a coon hunter. I did like how he did make that little white lie, that little exaggeration of how he supposedly treated 6 hounds in one night, or 6 coons in one night.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, Billy was like, it was only 3.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you kind of built him up a little too much.
Mm-hmm.
So another thing I want to talk about is I really like the callback with the mountain lion. So we see him at the beginning of the story when he first gets the puppies. So when he gets the puppies, his grandfather orders them, and he's like, well, they won't be ready for a week. He's like, no, I waited 2 years. That's enough. So he walks to the town, 30 miles one way, like in the middle of the woods, mountains, and there's dangerous animals, and this takes him a while to get there. So he gets the dogs, he comes back, and at this point, they're puppies. They're very, very young. And they stop to sleep in this cave, and in the middle of the night, this mountain lion comes, and Billy has to kind of go out there, scare it off to save the puppies so that way they don't get eaten and him himself don't get eaten. And then at the end of the story, you kind of see the dogs repay that debt by saving Billy from the mountain lion. It does end up with them dying, but I just really like that callback. They kind of did like full circle with it to show like that growth in their relationship.
I mean, yeah, I kind of agree with the vast majority of that. I don't know, it was kind of funny for the fact that throughout the entire story, and I know neither one of us has mentioned this, he always prayed for like having the dogs. He always prayed for, what to do. He ultimately ended up basically praying for strength and praying for help throughout the entire book. And I just felt like it was a prayer that was well earned from the beginning to the very end, because it was like, well, I want these coonhounds. It got to the point where these coonhounds ended up making his family be more out of poverty.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with the pricing of the skins, the money from the contest, I mean, they were able to get into the city thanks to that. And I felt like at the end, they served their purpose. And it was just kind of that time frame, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that was a really cool callback. Shows progress in the story. So we're gonna play a little game next. I have a bunch of dog breeds here, and you were just gonna tell me what kind of game they hunt.
Ooh.
So the first dog breed I have is Beagle. What kind of game?
Beagle?
Beagles, yeah.
They're relatively small, snuffy dogs, so I would probably have to put them towards maybe possums?
Yeah. Small game, so like possum, rabbits. Small game, that's all it says.
Mice.
Rats.
Rats.
Next I have foxhounds.
I mean, the name kind of does give it away, to be honest. So that would be foxes.
And
Other small to medium-sized rodents? I don't know.
small deer.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
yeah. Labradors.
Labradors hunt?
Mm-hmm.
They're relatively decent-sized dogs, so I mean, you might be able to put them up to...
Do you want a hint?
Sure.
They really like water.
Fish?
Duck. Duck hunting. English pointers.
I feel like those would be more for geese, but I could be wrong. You know what? Final answer is geese.
Yeah, so birds, geese, pheasants, probably ducks as well. And then the last one I have is blue tick coonhounds.
That would probably be for coons, maybe some deer. Anything that's a mid-sized creature or rodent, they'll hunt it.
So I have mountain lions and cougars.
Ooh, okay.
All right, very good. I think you got maybe one right. Just kidding. I think you got a couple of them right. I didn't keep track.
We'll go for one, seeing how I don't know my dog breeds, apparently.
That's all right. So is there any missed opportunities in your opinion? Anything that you would have done differently? Anything you would have changed in this story?
How Reuben died.
Yeah, I feel like it was a little unrealistic. And
It
a bit
was
brutal.
just for the... Well, brutal wasn't even like a word for it. It was just like sheer stupidity. Okay, first of all, I understand that this is in the middle of the night. Okay. This is where coons are most hyperactive, is during the night, especially in the winter. Their furs are much, much more valuable. So I just think that, it was kind of thought out, but it wasn't planned out properly. I think it could have been either avoided because, I mean, technically speaking, this is kind of like a children's book anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the death could have been really avoided. A severe injury, perhaps?
Yeah, something like with his legs, we couldn't go hunting or something like that. But there's a lot of death in this story for being a children's book. So.
Oh, for sixth graders, yeah.
Yeah. I think the dogs at the end told the story that it needed to tell. I don't think they needed to throw in a whole nother death scene, I guess you could say. So,
miscellaneous quest.
Yeah. So I said that I felt like the story didn't have much drive. Obviously he had his reasons, but okay, so between when he got the dogs and before the contest, all of that felt very bland. We saw obviously a lot of training and we need to see that, but I feel like there was no drive. There was just him going hunting. And then eventually we got to the contest. And at the beginning, there was the drive of getting the dogs. And then after that, I don't know, it felt a lot of it was very bland. And I feel like for a while the story didn't feel like it was going anywhere. I thought it was just going to be like a coming of age story. But I just wish there was a little bit more drive within the actual plot of the story. I think the characters had good drive, but I wanted more in the plot.
I think it was pretty much fine as far as the plot going, and because you have to look at it from a perspective of, okay, we got a boy who's at the age of 12. He's in that state where he really wants something, and he's gonna have this determination and drive to really earn this. He gets up to the point where he earns everything, kind of like at that hilltop just before we hit the roller coaster down. So I think that was a perfect kind of steadiment on that before taking the steep dive down into death.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my opinion on it.
Yeah, I don't know. I just felt like it was kind of slow storytelling wise. So, but yeah, we're kind of coming to a close here. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
What does pop taste like?
Gosh, that was so funny because the sisters were so freaked out about it. They were like, what? You got to taste soda pop? What? And he was like, yeah, I'm just that cool. Wasn't it like Coca-Cola or something? Or something fruity?
It was a
like
strawberry.
Yeah, it was a strawberry drink. And he was like, yeah, I'm just super cool, and I got to have some soda pop. Yeah, that was funny.
I think it was just funny because when he got into the city, I don't know if you sit there and visualize this or not, because when I was listening to this book, I was sitting there for the most part visualizing everything, like putting myself into like a kind of like in his shoes moment, especially when he was just sitting there looking at himself in the window. Like he had like a perfect reflection of himself, and he's just sitting there just like looking at himself.
Mm-hmm.
And then he came up to the school. Boys came up to him and be like, you go to this school? No. What school do you go to? Well, I'm homeschooled. Mama taught me how to read and write and arithmetics. Yeah, that kind of opened up its own can of worms with the kids. And
yeah, I feel like he definitely, when he goes into the city, he sees how much different his life is from being in quote-unquote civilization. Like, obviously he lives out in the woods, but there are people around, but it's very different living in the city when you live out in the country. So there's a lot more expectations and
traditions to uphold and all that bogus.
Lifestyle is definitely different. So yeah. So we do a little rating scale here on the podcast. So I would rate Where the Red Fern Grows 4 pennies out of a dime. So I like the story. I think it tells a good coming of age story. I personally, I don't know, I didn't love the story. I think that it told a good story, but it wasn't my cup of tea. It wasn't my soda pop, if you will. So what would you rate it?
I would definitely, because of the life lessons and everything that it withheld, I would give it 8 out of 10 red ferns.
All right.
Only because of the fact that you have life lessons in here. I thought it depicted a really good story. I thought it painted a really good picture. I think for me, it definitely tugged a lot of heartstrings for sure. Having to be, raised in the boonies, I definitely enjoyed the story.
All right. Speaking of the red fern, we didn't even talk about it. So the red ferns happen at the end of the story, so they bury the dogs beside each other, and they go to move away, so they finally get to move into the city, and when he gets there to say goodbye to the dogs, there's this red fern, and at first he was going to cut it down, and then he remembered that from the Indian stories that red ferns are planted by angels to watch over the gravestones, so he left it there, and I find it a good representation of like how the memories of his dogs are always going to be in that fern as well as in his memories. So they're always going to be around, even though they're not physically around. He's always going to remember them. And that actually draws back to the beginning of the story where this whole thing is a flashback because it takes place like it starts with him being an adult and he sees these dogs fighting and it reminds him of his childhood, and then that's when the story starts. So
yeah, because he ended up taking one of the dogs under his wings for a spell, and then let it be on its way. He left the gate open. I don't remember. I don't think we went back to where he was old again at the end of the book.
No, it just ended with him saying that he wanted to go back, but he never has. Thank you for coming on to the podcast.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yep, and I think you're going to be back on. I don't think we have anything scheduled for the rest of the year, so we'll be back on next year. All right, and thanks again.
All right, bye, guys.
Thank you for turning the pages with us this week. If you've enjoyed this episode, show your support on social media. Don't forget to turn on your notifications to get a reminder of the next episode. Thanks again for listening to The Book Stop. Bye!